You're listening to Don't Sell the Farm.
Listen, friend, God does not have to say to us again, I want you to go out and witness it. 1900 years ago, Jesus said to us, go ye out into all the world and preach the gospel unto every creature. He does not have to say one more word. Those are our marching orders. We need no sign from heaven. We need no urging of the Spirit. We have a command that has never been rescinded. The urgency of the hour is into all the world, and we do not have forever to preach this gospel. The time is running out.
Welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, we have Pastor Stephen Cascio on. My co-host, Aaron, his wife, Tanya, had a baby, so he is not here today. So Stephen and I are here to talk a little bit about Stephen's experience pastoring, taking over other works, and his time with Pastor Mitchell, and traveling with him and going around and doing healing crusades and various things. So, Stephen, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Sure. I want to start off just if you could give a brief testimony of how you got saved, you know, what your background is and how you ended up feeling the call of God on your life.
Sure. Yeah. So, going back in time a little bit, my parents were both saved in Prescott in the 70s. My father moved from Long Island, traveled around in Arizona a little bit, and then ended up in Prescott. My mother moved from California. They met in the church. They got saved in the church, married, had kids, and I'm the fourth in our family, so I'm the baby of the family. And I got saved when I was 15 years old. Pastor Lamb was preaching in the Ruth Street Church, and I couldn't really tell you what he preached about, but leading up to that moment as a 15-year-old punk, you know, had a lot of good things given to me in my life, had a lot of blessings in my life, but as trying to avoid Christianese, but as a church kid, you don't really appreciate what your parents attempt to save you from. You think you're missing out on the world. So at least for me, I had the foresight to know that becoming a drug addict was probably a bad idea, or becoming an alcoholic was. I wanted to avoid that. One of the nice things about our fellowship is you can see people's lives changed. Former drug addicts coming in, and being delivered out of that. And as a church kid, I saw that, wrote it down. Okay, I don't want to become that, but I'll do other things. I'll be a sinner in different ways. And so I was rebellious against God. And my view was, as long as I'm not as bad as my brother,
slide under the radar, kind of.
I can slide under the radar a bit, and so that's kind of how I viewed my life. That's kind of how I lived my life, and but I had my come to Jesus meeting, and I walked into church on a Wednesday night, and something was different about that service. I'd sat through hundreds of altar calls and heard tons of sermons, and nothing really affected me like that night. I knew God had my number. I knew that I was going to be held accountable for my sin, and it didn't matter how I was raised. It didn't matter who my parents were or siblings. None of that mattered. So I had to come face to face with my own sin, and that service, I rose my hand, I went down to the altar, I got saved, and my life has been radically changed since that point. And thank God I don't have the testimony of, I used to be a drug addict, or I used to, be an alcoholic. So
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, again, avoiding Christianese here, but kind of unavoidable. The church kid mentality is, oh yeah, I got to go make a testimony for myself, or maybe not so much in that way, but people feel that did get saved before they really went and blew up their whole life, that, oh man, my testimony is lame, nobody cares, but
yeah.
But I look at that as way more powerful, that you made the decision early and you didn't waste any time.
Yeah.
I wish I could go back and not waste time.
Yeah. And I think you have two camps. You have church kids who say, yeah, I'm going to go make a testimony for myself and, become a drug addict. That you might have a few kids that do that. But I think for the most part, church kids can be very prideful, and in the feeling of like, I'm going to beat the rap. Yeah. Everybody else's life blew up, but it's going to be different for me. I'm going to make something.
Exactly.
For myself, And so, after I got saved, I had a neighbor friend, and we had high aspirations of starting a metal band, Christian metal band. I was learning drums at the time.
You're going to be the next Straker.
Man, yeah, it was. Yeah, I can remember sitting in my bedroom with my friend, and he gives me a track. I think it was Under Oath or somebody.
Oh yeah, okay.
And it was. He's like, can't you feel these words? Listen to these words, man. It's so powerful. And I'm like,
I can't hear these words.
I can't get much out of this. And, so thankfully, God had other plans for me. And, we didn't start touring as a Christian metal band. We couldn't find a singer or a guitar player. So, flighty musicians. But no, it's true. God really was gracious and protected me from a lot of that. My parents were saved when I got saved, and so my home life, it was a blessing to have stable parents. And, somewhat stable siblings. But we all had to have that moment for ourselves. I can't get to heaven based on the salvation of my parents. We're all going to be held accountable for our own actions. And so, that was my conversion experience, and and that's where we are today.
Well, good.
I'm not sure how much more you need.
No, that's great. No, so the question then becomes, you got saved. You're a convert now. Where does the discipleship begin in that? What did you realize or come to the realization that maybe I'm called to preach?
Yeah, so for me, getting saved, that dealt with the issue of eternity, but I didn't have any real aspirations of, preaching or doing anything phenomenal for God. In high school, I was in a fire science class, and I began to direct my life at becoming a firefighter, and I was going to join a wildland crew, and through different events, circumstances, it didn't really pan out that way. And I remember growing up, and I always admired my brother-in-laws. They were, when I was young, they were disciples. They were rising up. They were preaching. They had high hopes of doing something for God. Mm-hmm. And so I admired that, but it wasn't that their calling didn't turn into my calling.
Right.
And so it was like, oh, that's cool. That's neat. I admire it, but that's not really where I want my life to go. And so I had no real intention of being a pastor and I didn't even really see how that could become a reality. As I was growing in my salvation, I joined a band, and so that was exciting, being a part of something bigger than myself, and the first band I was in, it was a reggae band with Denny Halverson, Mark Peppage, Rich Merck, and a bunch of other people. But it was those exciting times there. But really, the galvanizing moment for me in my calling, Pastor Greg preached a sermon, I believe it was in 2010. It was the January Bible Conference. It was entitled Shields of Brass. Mm-hmm. And It spoke to me in a way, God spoke to me in a way that I'd never really experienced before. Discipleship up until that point for me was just kind of like when I have time, or it's kind of like a social thing. Okay, I'll go to Serious Men because I don't want to get hassled by my friends. But it was in that moment. I remember Pastor Greg challenging if you felt called to preach, and I remember God speaking to me almost audibly. I want you to preach the gospel, and it was like I'd never heard that before. That wasn't really the trajectory of my life,
right?
But that really helped clarify a lot of things in my mind of what kind of person will I become down the road, and what does God have for me, the overall plan. And it's like Pastor Greg has said, the two most important moments of your life is the day you were born and the day you find out why.
Right.
And it was at that service that I found out why. Career, making money, building a family, it's like, those things are all important to a degree, but when the DNA of a man who's called by God, when God speaks to them and says, this is what I want you to do, this is the direction I want you to go in your life, everything else has to become secondary. Everything else has to line up behind that, and that really helped me, because it wasn't just like this ethereal, maybe, Great Commission, go into all the world. Yeah, God wants all Christians to be fruitful. It was personal for me.
Right.
And so that was really the starting point, and before then, I made decisions, things that were unwise, but God really helped steer me away from making very bad decisions in relationships. And, again, my pastor, Pastor Greg, helped bring clarity in a situation that if I had gone through with it, and I'm being vague on purpose, but if I had gone through with it, I think my life would be very, very, very different. And so, there was those defining moments.
Yeah.
At the time, it's a slight course correction, but then you look back and it's like,
right,
wow,
1 degree course correction after miles.
It makes
can
a
be
huge
very,
difference.
very different. Yeah.
And so that was the moment where I felt called to preach, and after that it was, the basic decisions of faithfulness, prayer, reading your Bible, being committed. I remember going up to Pastor Greg and telling him, I feel called to preach. And he's like, all right, man, that's great.
Yeah. The typical.
It was the handshake, and then it's like, okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
But that was more powerful for me, because it was like, all right, this isn't just something that I think is happening in my head. I had to vocalize it.
Yeah.
And I had to go on record. And so,
would you say that it's sort of like any act of faith, you have to sort of put action behind it for it to be more real? It's, you can sort of have it in your head, but if you put some action behind it, it becomes a little bit more.
Yeah, because if it's just in your head, you cannot do it and nobody will be the wiser.
Yeah.
If you tell somebody and it's like, hey, didn't you say you were called to preach?
Yeah. Why are you doing that?
That's
not a church. That's not a discipleship decision. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's what Pastor Greg calls them, as discipleship decisions. There'd be big decisions in your life. And I've been in his office before.
Yeah.
And talking to him about a big decision, something that's, going to be pretty radical. And he goes, well, does that bring you closer or further away from what God has called you to?
Yep. And oftentimes, because as Christians, we live a life by faith, you're trusting God. So to say yes to the call of God means you're saying no to a number of other things. Right. Making a lot of money and a great career, all those things, they're not necessarily evil in and of themselves, but they have the capacity to take you further away from the call of God.
Exactly.
So you put down anchors and you put down hooks into the temporary, and then once you get older, and I've seen this even in our church, guys who at one point they felt called to preach, and now they have cemented themselves into this current position, and it's like, well, I can't go and pioneer because I have debt or I have obligations,
Right.
or, all these different circumstances. When looking back on my life, I can honestly say that the place of the most blessing, the place of the most direction in my life and encouragement, and is in the center of the will of God.
Yeah.
Every single time. And it's really it was really, again, like I said before, it was really a galvanizing moment, because then it was like, once I felt the call of God, I felt God speak to me, then it was easy to say no to those other things.
Right.
I'm not going to be a firefighter, a wildland firefighter, and be away from church for 6 months out of the year.
Right.
That doesn't get me any closer to the will of God.
Exactly right. Yeah.
That played out in relationship decisions, that played out in financial decisions, and that was really that was a key moment for me, because it made everything clear.
Right.
Right.
So you went from disciple to pastor, obviously, at some point. What year did you? Because you were launched originally to Denver.
Yep.
To Pioneer. What year was that?
So we went on staff as concert directors in 2013, and then the following year, July 2014, we were launched into Denver, Colorado, to Pioneer.
Okay. And so Denver is an area that I know at that point had a number of, maybe not at the point when you were there, but there were a number of people there already.
Yeah. So a number of people, as far as
a number of pastors already pioneering that city.
Yeah. One of the motivations for me even wanting to go to Denver was Brandon and Andrea Pepich were already there for 6 months, and they were having screaming revival. Like, God was moving, miraculous things were happening, people were getting healed, and I knew Brandon from before, and by his own admission, God used him in a powerful way, and it was unexpected.
Yeah.
Up until that point, before Brandon, got to Denver, he had really started stepping out in Prescott and Prescott Valley, praying for the sick, seeing people get healed. And so that was, to me, in my mind, that was always a reference point.
Yeah.
Because I said, God, if you can use Brandon, surely you can use a guy like me. And I said, if God's moving there, he can move for me too. And it was, I think it was a Thursday night of conference when I was on staff. Pastor Greg said, we don't really have any churches for you to take over, but you want to pioneer, where would you like to pioneer? Right. It was this Thursday night. I was like, Denver. And I knew nothing about Denver really, just from what Google Maps showed me. And he's like, all right, we'll announce it tomorrow. And so, that was a pretty powerful experience. And going back, just going back a little bit in the discipleship process before we went on staff, I think when I started preaching in 180, there was, I want to say, like 12 altar call preachers at the time.
Wow.
And so
bit of a rotation, eh?
The rotation was like
every 3 months or so.
Yeah, you had no excuse to not have an illustration and have that thing polished to the max.
Yeah.
And so, but what is amazing about our fellowship that has always inspired and encouraged me is it doesn't work like a climb the ladder and hopefully you get to the top eventually. Because if that were the case, then guys would be, well, I'm at the bottom rung of the ladder. It'll take me 15 years before I get sent out because there's all these other guys in front of me. The way our fellowship works is you feel the call of God. You want to preach. You're going to do something about that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't start when you finally get out to whatever field you want to preach in. It starts in your local church. You go to your pastor, I want to do something for God. It's like, okay, well, what are you doing now?
Right.
If the church, the numbers of people in the church was solely dependent on how many people you won to Jesus and brought to church, how many people would be in your church today?
Exactly.
Right. And so that was one of the conversations, one of the powerful conversations I had with Pastor Greg, he invited me out to coffee one morning, and I'm like, yeah, cool, going to coffee with Pastor. This is great. And we were probably 3 or 4 months away from being launched.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me point blank, he said, can you point to one area of your life where the supernatural power and working of God is at work? He said it much more eloquent than I did.
Yeah.
One area of your life where there's something supernatural happening.
Yeah.
And he said, because when you go out onto the field, when you go pioneer, it's not going to matter how well you can organize paperwork or whether or not you can design just the perfect flyer or banner. What it's going to depend on is the supernatural power of God working through your life, whether that be getting people saved or seeing people healed or whatever the case may be. Something supernatural has to be at work. And so that really challenged me to step out in faith and begin to pray for the sick, begin to, exercise that faith muscle, because it's true. When you get out on the field, people don't really care who your pastor is.
Yeah. No one knows.
Nobody
knows you.
Right. And so the expectation can't be that, oh, when I show up, it's just going to happen. It's like, no, it takes work.
Yeah.
It takes you have to put the work in, you have to put the energy in. Like Pastor Mitchell said, you have to work like it all depends on you, but pray like it all depends on God.
Yeah.
It's that truth and tension. And so, that was a powerful moment. So arriving into Denver, we pull in with our U-Haul, and it's a crazy scene because at the time, Colorado had just opened up the cannabis market.
Oh,
and so,
right.
You could legally smoke it. And so when we first rolled into town, I'm like, man, they must have a serious skunk problem here in Denver.
Naive Prescott kid.
Disgusting. Here I'm a country bumpkin from Prescott, and one of the first apartment complexes we go and outreach in, I open the door and this guy opens up. He's got dreads. His eyes are all, murky and red. He's got a giant bong on his coffee table, and the smoke just billows out of his house. And I'm just like, this isn't Prescott anymore, But God really helped us in Denver. We saw some powerful conversions.
Great.
Yeah.
And so you went from Denver, obviously seeing some good stuff there, and then there was an opportunity to take over a work in 29 Palms.
Yep. Yeah, we labored in Denver for 2 years. God really helped solidify a work there. Circumstances of life, mysteries of life, why some people leave, some people disappear and it doesn't work out. But we were able to take our church, merge it with Brandon Pepich's church, and we were able to respond to the need in 29 Palms because the pastor that was there had to go to Marion, Illinois, because the pastor in Marion, Illinois went to Kathmandu, Nepal.
Okay.
And so it's the domino effect of our fellowship.
Yeah.
When somebody answers the call, that usually leaves a space open,
Some vacancy.
Yeah, and so it was a healthy change for us. It was a very, very timely transition, moving from Denver. And there's still, it's like with anything in the ministry, you leave a piece of yourself wherever you go, and there's still a part of our hearts that are still in Denver. But the positive thing from that is you look now, we have the benefit of hindsight, right? So a number of people that got saved in our church there, and we were actually in Aurora, it's just a suburb of Denver. A number of people that got saved there, now they're serving God in another fellowship church in Florida, and so they're still living for God and being effective. So
what was it like?
Remains,
What was it like going from a state where they had just legalized pot and you had a bunch of potheads and drug addicts and stuff coming into your church, to military town, everything is straight laced and
Well, I mean,
Big difference there? Or?
you know that the thing, it's two totally different experiences, because what we saw happen in Denver is we saw a lot of former drug addict, drug dealers get saved, come into the church, and a lot of men getting saved, coming into the church. That was powerful. Then, like you said, the weed was an issue in Denver, obviously. But then moving into 29, you had two camps of people. You had the straight-laced military, but then the other reality of a military town is it's not just straight-laced Marines reading their Bible before bed every night. You had severely broken relationships in military towns. You have
That's what. So Aaron is, who's not here with us, but he would attest to the fact that Marines, the story of Marine marriages is always, almost universally, bad marriages.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah,
it maybe seems like a little bit more pressed and straight lace on the surface, but
right. Yeah, they press their uniforms and shine their shoes so they don't get in trouble. But you have a lot of couples, they enter into marriage under completely incorrect context. They get married because you make a lot more money as a married couple than you do as a single Marine.
Oh wow.
But then you combine that with Marines that get deployed, so then wives are stuck at home, and they're emotionally vulnerable. I don't know if that's okay to say in our current climate, but
you're gonna get canceled for that.
Canceled. But no, it's true though. You had a lot of Marine wives that were very broken, and my wife saw that. She'd go to the park with our kids, and on any given day she would talk to 3 or 4 Marine wives that, my husband's deployed overseas. I haven't seen him in months. And, she would end up praying with we had a lot of Marine wives getting saved in our church and at the beginning. But when you're taking over a church, you're trying to navigate all the different circumstances of that city. You have to relearn the town.
Yeah.
You've got a Marine base, but you also have town people that have nothing to do with the base. And so you're working with those different personalities. And
sure.
You're also, the other thing about a military town is you have people coming into that town from completely different backgrounds and cultures, right?
Right.
So East Coast, West Coast, you have, all different types of people coming in. And so you're having to learn a lot of stuff very quickly and how to work with people. And you're juggling, right? We're not just going to outreach town people, and we're not just going to outreach Marines. We have to try and find out a way to do both. And so at the beginning, we were trying to get on the base, start a Bible study group on the base. And I know the previous pastor, he had been trying the same thing. He had a couple of bands that were able to come in and play on the bass, but that was always a stronghold that seemed like, man, if we can just crack the code on the bass, if we can get something going. And the key was really having the right guys get saved at the right time. You had, high-ranking Marines getting saved in the church that had pull, that had clout and ability to give us favor. They knew the right people to talk to. And so, and now with Jake and Jen, it's blowing up all over the place. They have, in a good way. Yeah, no,
crazy good.
They have Bible study groups going all the time, in town, on base, off base housing, and so, we were really blessed to be able to, be a part of that.
Yeah. And sow the seeds.
Yeah.
To some
degree.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God brought the increase. And so that's one of the things about a takeover is you are inheriting blessing and work that you didn't work for.
Right.
Right. You didn't plant those seeds. You didn't plow that ground. You weren't there taking dominion. You weren't there in those prayer meetings.
Yeah.
But you get to inherit all that blessing.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's.
And 29 is a pretty old work at this point. It's been around. Like a decade. Right?
Yep. Yeah. It was originally pioneered by the Brooks, and then Micah and Megan Wright. They're in American Samoa now, they were able to take over that work and really they helped fix a lot of issues that were going on in that church. And like with any church, you have problems and situations that you inherit.
Yeah.
But it's working through those things. And like I've said to other people, with any kind of a takeover, you are bringing something that God has ordained, that
Right.
God has purposed for that time and that season.
Right.
Something that the other guy maybe didn't have so much, or it's just different. It's just a change, and sometimes a change is really healthy for a church.
Yeah.
You know, but now you see the steps, and the church has gone from obviously from nothing to now. You know, sorry, Jake, if you're listening to this, you're probably going to have to get a bigger building pretty quick.
Yeah.
But
he and I were just talking the other day, and he's like bemoaning the fact that he's outgrowing his building. I'm like, that's a good problem.
It's a good problem to have. It's going to turn into 180 or something.
Yeah, exactly. He'll turn it into his music scene.
Yeah, but no, and just the timing of God and how the transitions worked and how everything came about, it was really supernatural. God was able to bring in certain couples to the church that I felt like took the church to another level.
Yeah.
That really helped open the door. And you know, for 2.5 years, we labored to get a Bible study going on base. And I think it was like 3 weeks before we left, we finally were able to get into the base and start a Bible study. And
Oh, wow.
and now that thing has the valves opened completely on that, and
That's excellent.
God's really helping them. So
That's excellent.
yeah. So that was
So,
very exciting.
more recently, so you were in 29 for 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So more recently, you've come back to Prescott. Initially, you came back to be sort of Pastor Mitchell's armor bearer.
Yeah.
And I think that you probably gleaned a lot of valuable wisdom during that time.
Yep.
So I'd like to, just have a conversation about what that was like.
Yeah.
Some of the things maybe you learned from Pastor Mitchell, being with him all the time. Do you want to, just kind of go into that?
Yeah.
What was that like coming back to Prescott to do that?
It was surreal. It was, so it was actually April 19th, my birthday, when Pastor Greg and Lisa came to 29 to visit for a little bit, and Pastor Greg asked if we'd be willing to come to Prescott and help assist as like pastoral care and travel with Pastor Mitchell. Wherever he goes, I would go. I would help with, whatever he would need. And at that time, it definitely caught me off guard. I didn't really see it coming, but that was, that's the blessing of having the leadership that we have in our fellowship is men with wisdom enough to see, okay, what are going to be the needs down the road.
Right.
We don't want to just be reactionary, but we want to try and
Proactive.
meet those needs before they come. And so, coming into it, I wasn't, I had a relationship with Pastor Mitchell before, but it's just different. Like there's a separation. There's kind of a distance between you and the senior pastor when you're out on the field.
Yeah.
And really I was discipled by Pastor Greg. I wasn't really discipled by Pastor Mitchell. Obviously you glean things from sermons and breakfast table questions and that sort of thing. But it was a real privilege to be able to be with Pastor Mitchell and just see his life towards the end there, to see his commitment and his dedication.
Yeah.
At the beginning, the first few months, it was, our schedule was crazy. We had, I think at one point we were home for out of a whole month, we were home for maybe 10 days.
Wow.
That was a weekend here, a weekend there, a few days in between.
Jeez.
But, and it was, and those trips, it was mostly international. And so, you had very, very long flights, and I'm trying to process jet lag and keep it all to myself because,
You got nothing to say.
I got nothing,
to say. You're trying to live
I'm
with
trying to keep up with
89-year-old.
yeah,
90-year-old.
89, 90-year-old man. I'm trying to keep up with him. It's like, I'm not going to complain. I'm just going to have more coffee. But it was really one of the things that I noticed about Pastor Mitchell's ministry, especially in the end there. And I know he said this throughout his entire ministry, but what resonated with me the most was he imparted to men that whatever he could do, whatever he was doing, that those same men, they could do it also.
Yeah.
Right. It gave incredible dignity to some of these pastors, these young men who are like, I want to be like Pastor Mitchell.
Yeah.
That's admirable. Everybody wants to be like Pastor Mitchell. And Pastor Mitchell would say at the end of a healing crusade, before he would dismiss, he would call all the pastors up to the front, face the audience, and say, "These men can do whatever I can do. You come, you ask them to pray for you, and God will heal you." And it gave such a confidence to the next generation. And one of the things that I would ask Pastor Mitchell is, what's your biggest fear of what is going to happen to the fellowship after you're gone? I wouldn't have these conversations all the time. That'd be a little bit morbid. But I just wanted to get his perspective because, he had the benefit of being able to look back and see the many chapters of our fellowship that things that we've gone through. And, one of the things that he mentioned was, he said, the third generation always sells the farm. And I was like,
yeah,
well, I've heard that before, but I just said, well, can you explain that? Can you extrapolate on that? What does that mean? He said, well, the first generation, they see the potential.
Yep.
The second generation, they want to protect that. They saw the labors of their fathers. And so they're able to work the land. They're able to bring up a huge crop. They're able to see fruitfulness and blessing flow. But then you have the third generation. They're like, well, yeah, Grandpa started the farm. Dad's been working it, but I could do something else.
Yeah.
And thinking about our generation. And, the whole point of this podcast is to try and inspire the up and coming generation that
That's
we are.
exactly right.
We have the blessing of being able to inherit something that we didn't really work for.
Right.
The battles that Pastor Mitchell had to go through.
Exactly like what you said with 29. You came into something, inherited something that you didn't really work for.
Right. Yeah. And so, and I followed it up. I asked Pastor Greg, I said, well, why? Why does the third generation always sell the farm? And he said, well, number one, they don't have gratitude for what's been given to them. They don't value it. They don't see it as important, right? It's just church. Yeah, it's something my parents do or whatever, and number four or number three is the issue of appreciation and understanding why we do what we do. Why is it important? Why does it matter? Are we just another church organization, pulling offerings and just helping the community? Is that what we are?
Yeah, and gathering people, congregating people.
For people who don't understand what we do, that's probably the assumption they would come to.
Yeah.
But to understand and know our history, what we are as a fellowship is an absolute miracle of God. And a number of reasons for that, but just the fact that our form of discipleship is that, Pastor Mitchell preached the power of the local church.
Yeah.
The indigenous church principle, right? That everything needed to win the world for Jesus can be done in the local church.
Right.
So you have pastors are going to be listening to this podcast. You have a church of 30, 40 people, and you think, well, I'm not going to be able to win the world for Jesus for another 50 years because I don't have the resources. I don't have the people. There are all these limitations. But think about what Pastor Mitchell had when he stepped into Prescott.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot.
What does he always say? Like, 20 people with
27 people, and
counting his family.
Counting his family. Yeah, and that was the thing. But that when you view life as it all being about you take the God factor out of it,
Right.
then yeah, you're going to struggle.
And Pastor Mitchell, when he came into Prescott, it was a very broken church too. It was there was a moral failure before he came here. And people on the verge of leaving. The baptismal was filled with used clothes that they were doing, whatever rummage sales with, just to make ends meet.
Yeah, exactly. And so, not to get off track with the conversation, but that's really the blessing of our fellowship, is that, from a small local church, you can win the world for Jesus. Start discipling the men you have.
Right.
Start working with what God has given you. Be an example. You will preach who you are before you preach what you say. And that's the thing, is Pastor Mitchell had a heart for people at the very beginning. He had a love and a passion for people. Think, a country bumpkin from Arkansas.
Yeah.
How much can he relate to the life of a traveling hippie? Not at all. But the difference was he just loved people.
Right.
Right. He was able to see the potential in people before they saw it in themselves.
Right.
And really, in traveling with him, that's one of the things that, when he would get up and start praying for the sick, it was like God removed, he took him from 90 years old to 70 again.
Right.
And it was a powerful thing to watch, because it was like, that was the thing that he loved the most.
Yeah.
Was the look and expression on people's faces when God would heal them.
Yeah.
And he would say, what did Jesus do for you? And they say, oh, I'm healed, my back's healed, or whatever. And he said, does that make you happy? And they'd be laughing and rejoicing. But that was really what was so special about Pastor Mitchell from my perspective, was not only could he see the potential in other people, but he loved people so much.
Yeah.
And sometimes older folks, they can get crotchety, and it's like, it's a lot of work to love people, and it's like, well, I'm past that.
Pastor Mitchell never did.
Never.
Pastor Mitchell never did.
Yeah, he had his one-liners. He cracked jokes, but at the end of the day, it's like Pastor Mitchell had a heart for people all the way up until the end.
Yeah.
Got to the point where he couldn't really read his own handwriting anymore. But I don't think anybody could ever read his own handwriting. But I don't know how he did it for so many years. But even I would sit with him after prayer. We'd go back to his house, and I would sit and type out his sermons for him, and it was still vibrant. It was still, he wanted so badly to do this to the very end. He wanted to finish well.
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah.
Up until the very end, he worked, he prayed, he was adamant about that.
One of the most astonishing things to me was near the end, Pastor Mitchell, COVID and everything kind of happened all around the same time. But just seeing Pastor Mitchell, who towards the end was, maybe not as present in church as much, but just when he was there, he was in the prayer room, he was praying for people. It was amazing. Yeah. It was like, that was just one of the last things I remember about Pastor Mitchell. Like, man, he's here, he's praying for people, he's, getting a hold of God here.
He would ask me about people. We were, towards the end there, when his health started to fail, we were watching church from home, and he would ask me about people, how are they doing? Are they okay? He would always ask about Arnie Dirksen, was he in church today? And, and that was an amazing thing, because it wasn't a front.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, I got to put on a show, but it was like Pastor Mitchell loved people so much.
Right.
And that never really expired. It was always front and center.
And he always, he dealt with some of the worst rebellions and backstabs I could even imagine, and he never lost that love.
He put his credibility on the line and invested in people, and they stabbed him in the back and then spit in his face and said, "What did you ever do for me?" Oh, besides just giving me wheelbarrows full of money.
Yeah.
But he never got bitter.
Yeah, he never did.
You would think like after, that happened a few times, you'd be like, you know what? Bag the whole world evangelism thing.
I could see one time having that
Yeah.
happen.
It's like, okay, note to self, we're gonna do something different now. But
Yeah, he never gave it up. Yeah, I think I mentioned this book a couple of times in our podcast just because it's one that I'm one of the ones that's really stood out to me recently. It's Gordon MacDonald. Oh man,
something powerful.
Drawing a blank on the name here. The podcast listeners know because I've mentioned it before. Ordering Your Private World.
Okay.
But one of the things he really talks about is the difference between a driven man who can only really go so far, driven by ambition or whatever it is that's driving you, and a called man. And a called man can blow through all of the heartache and the explosions of life because he's called. And it's not, and he's got an orderly private world. And I think that word picture really describes who Pastor Mitchell was. He knew who God was. He knew who he was.
Yeah.
He knew what he was called to do, and he just never lost that vision.
Yeah.
And so the point, like you say, the point of this podcast really is to inspire that same vision of Pastor Mitchell. And, Pastor Greg obviously has picked up that mantle.
Yeah.
And he's running with it. But we are the third generation.
Right.
You and I.
Yeah. And you have to own the vision for yourself.
Right.
It can't just be something that, oh, well, we have a plaque on our wall and you want the vision, there it is. But
yeah,
it has to become who you are. It has to become your identity.
Well, that was absolutely part of Pastor Mitchell's vision, is discipleship. Mm-hmm. Discipleship is giving a part of you to the next person.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. You look at other moves of God and you can identify, William Booth, he started the Salvation Army, but can you name any disciples of William Booth?
Right.
Powerful organization at the time. They were doing something incredible for God, and now when you think of the Salvation Army, all you think of is Christmas time, a person ringing a bell outside the mall.
Right.
Right. And really that was the thing, was it's an imparted vision. You impart, you cast the vision, but it's up to us to pick that up and say, our generation today is just as broken, if not more broken, than the generation of the 70s. Right. Right. Young people that are suicidal and depressed. It's like, we have the answer. We have the hope for them. And if the latter is really going to be greater than the former, if the plowman is really going to overtake the reaper, then what it requires is the third generation to say, what God imparted to Pastor Mitchell, the vision, the inspiration, and the direction of our fellowship, what God gave to him, we need to own that for ourselves and pass it along to the next generation, should, Jesus tarry, as they say.
Sure. So there's a number of things that, would be included in that vision. Something that you sparked a thought for me is that there's a lot of things that are parts of our fellowship or distinctives of our fellowship, which is originally the name of this podcast, but we've changed it. I like both names either way.
And you got a better logo now.
Better logo now too. Thanks to
and bumper music.
Thanks to Stephen Cascio making a
not
logo
for
and
hire.
bumper music. Not for hire. Not for hire. If you're starting a podcast out there, he's not available. Just did me a favor. No, but one of the distinctives that we have as a fellowship is that we have outreach ministries like the 180, the music scene. And so I wanted to touch on that with you a little bit, just as sort of and I'm going to have Pastor Jesse Morales on as well to talk about this, but if we could briefly maybe talk about what is the benefit and value of the music scene, because I know that's one that comes under fire quite a lot. Another one is door-to-door outreach. Those two things tend to, and I don't know anybody personally, but tangentially you hear murmurings of, oh yeah, that doesn't work anymore. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
What's what would be the in your experience as a pioneer in 29 and even here in Prescott as a disciple, what would be the benefits of the music scene as a means of ministry?
Well, I think number one, the 180 is an evangelistic tool first and foremost. You're creating. Pastor Mitchell said, an outreach is you find a crowd or you create a crowd, right? And a universal language of all peoples for all generations has been music, right? And unless I've been living under a rock, I think the up and coming generation is still really into music. Maybe they're not into the Doors or Journey or
right,
Pink Floyd. Maybe they're into modern music, which that makes sense to me. So 180, it's a tool of evangelism to draw sinners,
right,
to create a platform where the gospel can be presented in a clear way and people can be brought to a decision to get saved. So to me, that's number one. If it ever becomes something different, like, hey, we're having a Casting Crowns concert at our music scene tonight, well, you're appealing to a different clientele. You're
right,
appealing to church people.
right.
That's not what we're after.
Right.
Right. So you have to bear that in mind. It's an evangelistic tool. And I think number two, it's a mechanism for discipleship. And that's not just the altar call preachers. It's not just, hey, these guys can learn how to preach an altar call and be clear and mention Jesus and,
hopefully mention Jesus.
I've been to a couple concerts, unfortunately, with our superior ministry where I've heard, guys forget Jesus, and it's like, oh, there was something missing in that altar call.
Something was missing.
And so anyway, it's a tool of discipleship where you can have, men learn how to preach, how to pull an altar call, how to contend for the supernatural in the altar call, but also think of the different ministries that are involved in the music scene.
Right.
You have bands. That means you have to have a band leader. You have to have music that is relevant, to the current generation. If you get up and just play Beethoven, then you're probably not going to draw a whole lot of young people to that.
I've experienced, I don't want to derail, but I've experienced situations where, not third generation trying to sell the farm, trying to, make it relevant to their generation, in some sense where, we're having a concert like an electro pop night. We did that a couple, 2 or 3 years ago here in our 180 scene. And like you said, we're not dealing with people who love the Doors and, whatever else, you know what I mean? Motley Crue, though we have a few Motley Crues from time to time playing in the 180.
Maybe, yeah.
But what happened was there was a lot of resistance from the older generation. Sure. And I understand it to a degree because they don't want, that's not what we are. We don't want to be becoming secular, but it wasn't. And there was a lot of visitors and people got saved, and it was powerful. So how do we strike that balance between including the older generations and saying, hey, we're not trying to change this thing fundamentally. We're trying to modernize it to a degree.
People resist change when they don't understand vision, when they don't understand purpose. So, they equate the pattern is, song, testimony, drama, song, testimony, drama, altar call. That's how it has to be. And if you ever divert, then that's like the Holy Trinity. You can't divert from that. But when you understand purpose and you understand, look, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to appeal to kids that are under 20 years old.
Right.
Right. So if you have to hand out glow sticks at the beginning of a concert, like we're not encouraging people to, take their clothes off, or, we're not handing out bottles of beer because we want to be relevant and current to the culture.
Right, exactly.
Nothing's changing about our message. We give dignity to the gospel. We provide a platform where the gospel can be presented clearly. But your avenue, instead of having bands playing on the stage, you have a DJ, or you have, I wasn't here. We were in 29 when the hip hop night happened, or the electro pop night, but I think the point is you're coming up with a way, okay, how can we reach this generation?
Right.
Back in the 70s, they went to Pastor Mitchell and said, we want to do street dramas. And Pastor Mitchell's like, what's a street drama? Then they explained it. A bunch of people get saved. Same thing with music. When they went to California, Pastor took a couple of other guys and they saw a concert, and Pastor Mitchell's like, this could work in Prescott.
Yeah.
They came back, they hired, some they didn't have any bands in the church.
Yeah.
So they hired some guy who played acoustic guitar. I don't think he was saved. They got a home stereo system to amplify it, but you had like 300 visitors and, tons of people saved. And so that was the catalyst, is like.
And Pastor Mitchell would have even said, wasn't his favorite kind of music.
No.
Not what he would have listened to.
No.
In his free time. Through
the years, he's been to, I can remember vividly as a young man, back in the day at the Underground, we were having our concert, and I don't remember what bands, they were probably horrible, but we had bands playing, and I can remember Pastor Mitchell just sitting in the back, and he was there every concert. It was like, not because he loved crummy music, but because he understood what we were trying to do.
Right.
If a glow stick is the difference between a 16-year-old suicidal kid coming into 180 or not, buy a glow stick.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the other issue too, and we have to be careful too. It's like we can't paint with too broad of a brush. Perhaps there are people out there in the fellowship somewhere that say concerts don't work anymore. My argument to that is, well, are you doing them well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you? Do you understand the vision? Do you understand what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, it's sort of, it's like saying it doesn't work anymore, but you're producing a product that nobody wants to invite anybody to.
Sure.
Because it's terrible.
Well,
and embarrassing.
And you said a bad word too. You said product.
But it is a product.
Exactly. I think in the church world that, that I don't think church people like viewing it as a product, right? We don't like viewing it as, oh, this is something we're trying to sell, but we're not trying to appeal to the church world. We're trying to appeal to sinners.
Right. And we're not selling the gospel as a product. What we're selling as a product is the concerts.
It's an avenue, yeah.
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 The gospel, right? The gospel is presented by the means of the product.
It's a bridge.
It's a bridge.
All it is, 180 is just a bridge to bring people to a place where they can hear the gospel and be given an opportunity to respond. And I would also add, it's a regular ministry, right? We don't put all our eggs in one big event basket where, we had live animals and acrobatics team and all this stuff for this one huge event. But what happens if it gets rained out?
Yeah.
What happens if the power goes out in the middle of it? You've invested thousands of dollars into this thing.
Or what happens if no visitors come?
What if nobody shows up?
What if nobody shows up and you put all this effort and money?
But then the assumption is that, I guess now big events don't work. You've already said music scene doesn't work. Oh, big events don't work. And it's a slippery slope too, because then you might say, well, why are we having service on Sunday night? If we can make the same amount of money Sunday morning as we can Sunday night, why would we have a Sunday night service?
Yeah.
Why are we doing music scene if we can have the same results by going to Walmart? So I think the other benefit of the music scene is we have now been operating a concert scene for almost 50 years in Prescott.
Yeah.
If our fellowship is 50 years old, Pastor Mitchell started it shortly after. So, we see every weekend, we see people getting saved. And when we don't, it's another teaching moment for our disciples. Right. Now you have to lay hold of God. Now you have to figure out why. Now you have to start pushing buttons. maybe you have to come here earlier and pray. Maybe you have to throughout the week. Maybe you have to fast with your other disciples.
That'd be an interesting thought experiment to kind of run it back. And obviously, you don't see every single person who prays in the concert in church the next day,
Sure.
and then powerfully saved, and they become a
what
disciple.
must I do to be saved?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you were to go back and just kind of do the math of seeds planted, and people who maybe we don't know, they might have not even been from here, but ultimately they went off back to their hometown and did a work for God, and we'll never know about that until eternity.
Right.
It's like, who knows the ultimate benefit?
Yeah, but we could say without a doubt, if you don't do anything, then obviously you're going to have zero fruit.
Exactly.
Right. And so for some pastors listening to this, they can come to the conclusion, well, I can't do that until I have my own standalone building for 180. Do it in your church.
Yeah.
Put up some colored lights, spend a couple $100 on some lights and banners.
Right.
Make it look like a concert. Don't make it look like a church, and
yeah.
I don't know if we even need to get into the practicals of making a 180 run well and efficiently, but I think it's just inspiring people and giving them
I'll definitely be getting into the more of the practical stuff with Pastor Jesse, because we're going to probably focus an entire episode, or maybe even 2 parts, on building a concert scene, what's all involved. And I know you have a lot of insight on that as well. But he brought concerts back from the grave, essentially, in 2 different cities.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have a conversation about that. So definitely, those listening, you're going to want to tune into that one for sure. But this has been a good conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you for coming on, for sharing your wisdom. I appreciate you sharing Pastor Mitchell's wisdom by proxy.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come on, and I think this podcast is going to go far. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to inspire people.
Exactly.
Not
trying to be gourmet either.
Yep. Yeah.
Just a good snack.
Well, I think we gain something pretty powerful when we can hear testimonies and conversations from leaders in our fellowship on a different level of just preaching a sermon.
Right.
You kind of get a deeper insight into who they are. You kind of get to develop those thoughts a little bit better.
We, here in Prescott, we've had the ability to sit down at the breakfast table for years.
Yeah.
With Pastor Greg, Pastor Mitchell, other leaders that come to Prescott for conferences and have the opportunity to ask questions of them. And so, like you say, the ideal of this podcast is that this is the breakfast table now available on a more broad scale.
Right.
So,
and if anything, it can just inspire men to start asking questions from their pastors.
Exactly right.
Why do we do it this way? Why do how can we be more effective in this? Is this the best strategy, right?
Right.
And that was the other thing too, just not to dive back into, I know we're coming to a conclusion here, but with Pastor Mitchell, guys could ask him questions, basic questions, silly questions, whatever it was. And because Pastor Mitchell cared for people, he always gave them the dignity of an answer.
Yeah.
He would answer their questions clearly. He would try and inspire men wherever we would go. We would have meals and, questions would be asked. And, that's the encouraging thing is
sometimes his answer would bite a little bit. If it was a dumb question.
If he knew the person,
If you knew the person.
Yeah. But we love him anyway.
We love him. We love him for it.
Very
All right. So
Appreciate
thank you guys for tuning in. We look forward to another podcast next week. Bye now.